Hey, welcome back to Zombie Tactics. Shooting in full morning sunlight today, which is fitting because I'm doing a follow-up to the previous video, Opportunism is Not a Plan, in the Fantasy versus Reality series, and I hope to shed a little more light on the subject. Fitting because that video was dark, both somewhat because of the subject matter as well as the lighting conditions in which it was shot. I want to address some comments and I guess some criticisms that were made about that video, both in terms of private messages that I received as well as comments that were made in the comment section for that video. To do so, I want to make sure that we understand something very clearly, which I don't think was clearly understood by some people who watched that video and raised some concerns, and that is that the context of the video is actually defined by the title pretty aptly, and that is that opportunism is not a plan. And the way to look at that is to say, well, not having a plan is not having a plan. And at the very least, not having a plan or not having a good plan is not having a very good plan. And the reaction to it took a number of different forms. The first form of the reaction from some people who reacted, I believe, somewhat negatively or I don't know, negatively, let's just put it that way, is that they seem to misunderstand a couple of comments that I made along the lines of the likelihood that you're going to suddenly rise to the occasion, not having made any plans, and simply loot or attack people who are prepared, and that's the means by which you're going to secure your survival. Now, people seem to take that to mean that I was saying that there's no way that you're ever going to attack a prepared person and have any success at it. And it took the form everything from somebody saying, you know, well, I'm just going to hide and wait for you and, you know, shoot you from 400 yards away with a sniper rifle, and then I'm going to take all your stuff. Well, certainly that kind of thing is possible, right? I mean, depending upon the, you know, the balance of forces and all that kind of things, it's possible. It's still just not a very good plan. And let me take that specific example for an example. You're the kind of person, let's just say for purposes of this example, you're the kind of person that hasn't really planned, you haven't set aside any weaponry, you haven't set aside any food, you haven't set aside any medical supplies, you have no real training. Because that's what we're talking about here, is somebody who doesn't have a good plan at all. Well, the thought I'm getting from people is that somehow, even though you are the kind of person that hasn't planned at all, you're suddenly going to come upon the ability to find a sniper rifle, which you will then have the ability to properly zero, and that you know enough about how to operate that, you know enough about the ballistics and the trajectory tables and all that kind of stuff to properly set up your dope and all that kind of thing, just because you're so awesome, even though you may not have any experience or knowledge with that at all, beyond maybe playing some video games. And that's the idea that you're going to count on, the idea that you're going to find that sniper rifle and you're going to be able to make that 400-yard shot and take out some person that's prepared, and then you're going to take their stuff. Well, now think about that. Again, we're talking about whether it's a good plan or not. Somebody might be able to pull that off, particularly somebody who has had some military training along those lines, but somebody who's been a sniper in the military is not without skills. And so to say that that's not a plan for that person is maybe a little short-sighted. Even so, the kind of person who's likely to have skills and planning of some kind is probably the least likely person to rely upon opportunism as the means of their survival. Even in such a case, let's just take that thing. This person was talking about they were a lone wolf, they're unprepared, somehow they're going to become the awesome sniper of doom, they're going to shoot somebody from 400 yards and take their stuff. All right, you shoot somebody from 400 yards and take their stuff. There's a rifle, crack, and you've announced your presence to everybody else in the area. Oh, wait, I thought I forgot this. Oh, you're going to use a suppressor, because you know all about those too, even though you've never used one before, and apparently you don't understand that suppressors don't completely eliminate noise. So this plan is falling apart pretty quickly. Now let's just take into account the largest possibility, which is that at 400 yards, you're not going to make the shot. You've just announced your presence to somebody who now knows that he's under attack. He's going to hunker down in his house or his little enclave or whatever, his little luxury survival residence, and he's going to wait for you. And you're going to do one of two things. Keep in mind, you don't have any preparations, so you're out there starving to death all this time. one of two things is going to happen. You're going to say your plan is blown, or you're going to try some kind of attack. The problem is he's already seeing it coming. And you don't know whether there's one of them, two of them, or 40 of them in that house or that survival enclave. All you know is what you've seen, maybe scouting out for the last week or so. In other words, it's not a good plan. Let's take that scenario a little bit further, because I know the kinds of things that people are going to say based upon the kinds of things that they've already said. Well, I've got a team of 5 guys, and we're going to be a roving band of pirates or whatever. The idea is not that there's no way you could possibly have some success. Frankly, you're going to roll into some areas where there are people that have food and don't have the means to protect themselves, and you're going to get away with it for a while. The problem is, with 5 guys roving around doing this, it's going to get known pretty quickly what you're up to. Word does travel, even without electronic communications. And sooner or later, your little roving band of 5 people without a plan and without a clue are going to run into somebody who's better prepared than you are. And part of the reason why you're going to do that is because you haven't planned properly in the first place, and all you're doing is kind of making it up as you're going along. Now, we can take this as far as you want, but it's still not a good plan. And it's not a good plan, again, getting back to the cost-benefit and risk versus reward analysis. Say you know that I'm in a house full of an undetermined number of people, and you're going to attack that house because you think we've got stuff. By the way, you think we got stuff. You don't know whether we do or not. All you know is that we don't seem to be hurting too bad. You don't know whether we've got 3 months of supplies, a year's worth of supplies, or we're down to our last can of pork and beans, because your planning doesn't go that far. So your team of 5 guys, you attack my house, or you attack the place where I am. Are you counting on the fact that nobody's watching, or that nobody's going to see you coming? That's a pretty dangerous plan, and it's a poor plan. Now, your 5 guys are going to attack this house without any firm number for an estimate of how many people are occupying that structure, or how many people are armed or have any skill at arms, or even what the layout of the place is. That's a recipe for disaster. If you check attrition rates in war, where skilled soldiers are attacking, houses and things like that, doing door-to-door kickdowns and things like that, it's not a good thing. Skilled soldiers don't like to do this for a reason, because the advantage is always on the part of the person who's in the house and knows the layout. If they're armed and they're skilled at all, you're going to end up having 2 or 3 wounded people at the very least. Notice I didn't say killed. I just said wounded people by the time your little, merry foray into opportunism concludes for the day. 2 or 3 wounded people for the opportunity, possibly, of getting a can of beans or a year's worth of food is not a very good value proposition, because here's what happens. Now you're down to 3 wounded people, 2 wounded people, one of your guys is wounded. It sure wasn't a good plan for him, because taking a rifle round to the leg or a pistol round to the shoulder is probably a death sentence in a condition where you're not having access to ready medical care. And let's be honest, you don't have access to medical care because it's one of the things that you haven't planned and prepared for. So now here you are, you've taken over this house, maybe you've killed all the occupants, maybe you have all of their stuff, and now you're down 3 people. And if you're not down 3 people, you're at least hurt, or at least some subset of you is hurt. Now that's just based on what actually happens in reality. People come home wounded from war all the time with stories of this kind of stuff. And that fact kind of gets glossed over because we sometimes only take a look at casualty figures and say how many people got killed in a war. We don't take a look at how many people got wounded, how many people are paraplegics, how many people are missing an arm, a leg, a hand, an eye, things like this. So your little opportunistic plan was not a very good plan. Doesn't mean that those of you who didn't get shot up aren't happy with it. Maybe you thought that was a good plan if you were starving to death, but it's not a good plan overall. Now, what appears to be the second major concern is the idea that some people thought I was being dishonorable or not nice or not a good guy because I was implying that I would not aid people who were looking for help. Some people went so far as to question my religion or my faith, or to make it clear what they thought the standards of their faith were. My standards are pretty clear, and they are based on 1 Timothy and a number of other places in the Bible where it says that a man who does not care for his own household is worse than an unbeliever. And we can discuss this in the Greek if you'd like, but what was being said there was kind of a New Testament version, and in some cases an Old Testament version, depending upon which verses you're looking at, of the idea that charity begins first at home, that your first responsibility is to care for those in your own household, especially the aged, the infirm, the weak, people who are, in your care that you have a responsibility for. That's your first responsibility. Placing any of those people at risk for the sake of trying to pretend that you're a good guy and you're going to be the savior of the world by handing out bags of rice is a recipe for disaster, and we know that because what happens is you get known pretty well as you're the place where all the free food is, and you may end up with one person on your door one day, 5 people the next day, 20 the day after that, 100 the day after that, 500 the day after that, and pretty soon you're dead, your stuff is gone, and those people are only better off by the fact that they've had a couple more days added to their lives. That is not a moral position. That is not a moral way to operate. It's not a smart way to operate. It's not a spiritual way to operate. If you have largesse, if you have wealth, if you have excess, that is the place where your charity is supposed to come from. And that's why, in answer to some people's questions, why my plan includes, especially long-term, the ability to begin creating resources so that I can help others. But my plan begins with making sure that I'm around in the first place, and the people that I've counted on and the people that have planned with me are around in the first place. Why? Because we've demonstrated that we're the ones best able to undertake such a role. We're the ones best able to plan ahead and act accordingly. We start handing out all our resources to people who haven't planned. That's a recipe to just add another day to somebody's life, and they're going to die horribly anyway. And this is a principle that goes through so many things that it's silly that I even have to discuss it. If you're on an airliner, for instance, and you're watching the little spiel that the stewardess does at the front, they will tell you plainly that if the little mask drops out of the ceiling, the very first thing you have to do is get the mask on your face, not the person next to you, not your kid, not your aged grandmother, not the quadriplegic across the way or anything like that. You first. Why? Because that's the only way you're going to be in a position to help any of these people. You're flying along at 20,000 feet. If you don't get that mask on quickly enough, you're going to pass out. Now everybody's dead. Instead of you getting the mask on first, and then you can help your child with getting their mask on. You can help the aged person next to them that doesn't have good upper body mobility. You're in a position to help now. So taking care of yourself first and the people who have planned with you first is an actual moral and spiritual imperative. The idea that somehow you're going to have a fluffy-headed notion of charity, which is like, oh, I'm just going to give away all my stuff and God's going to take care of me, that is not biblical. And I would argue that with anybody. And again, I'll argue it with you in the Greek if you like. So let's get that out of the way. Let's just make it clear that that's my opinion anyway. If you have a different opinion, you're welcome to it. I just don't think that it's a workable opinion, and it's not a plan. Now, the third thing I kind of want to cover in this update video, which is running a little long already, is the number of people who do reply to a video like the first one that I made, and they'll be replying to this one too, who have taken upon themselves to be the judge of everyone else regarding a circumstance like this when they haven't done any planning. And so for that reason, you find an inordinate number of people that if you kind of check their channel pages and you check the things that they write about and the things that they're concerned about, you can be pretty clear right off the bat that they're into Call of Duty, they're into Medal of Honor, they're into playing Halo, but they're not into any kind of planning, and that forms the entire context of their opinions. You can also tell that many of them are quite a bit younger than they'll let on being, so while they want to write you a note and tell you that they're the commander of a battalion-sized militia who will be, taking over the countryside and restoring the republic, it doesn't take you long to figure out, based upon their sentence structure, lack of punctuation, lack of capitalization, lack of any kind of good grammar, the things that you see on their channel page that they like and dislike, that they don't have a plan at all, and they're just kind of, if I can be very blunt, talking out of their ass. Sorry for the language, but sometimes you have to be a little bit blunt. And this is the kind of person who I'm actually trying to get to, that if you are that kind of person, that you're 16 years old and you think you're in a position to tell somebody who's been at this for decades what they ought to do, the first thing you ought to do is get your own house in order. Do not come to me and tell me what I ought to do until you've made plans to take care of yourself, because otherwise you're exactly one of those people without a plan who's going to be in a real bad way, and keeping your head in the sand and saying that somehow you're going to be awesome and pull it out of the ringer at the last second just by through some sense of opportunism. It's not a plan. The same thing that makes you easily recognizable as someone who's probably not even an adult and without a plan is going to put you in a position to not be able to pull off that con game very well if things do hit the fan. So if you're that kind of person and you're making those kinds of comments, please do the very minimum of making sure that you've got your own house in order first before commenting about what somebody else ought to do. Many people are in that position who want to moralize on endlessly about what other people ought to do. They are exactly that kind of person. They don't have a plan, and now they have the fear factor coming in to effect, and they realize that they're not prepared. So their only preparation, the only thing that they think that they can do, is sort of morally blackmail other people into thinking that they have some sense of responsibility to take care of them. In other words, the reason why they're saying, well, you ought to do X and you ought to do Y, is because that would benefit them, not because it would benefit you. They're counting on you taking care of them because they're telling you that you ought to. It's not a recipe for success, and it's not a plan. The last notion I want to bring to mind is one that was brought to my attention by Hibernia's son, a YouTuber who I pay attention to quite a bit because he just quite frankly knows what the hell he's talking about. I'll put a link to his channel page or one of his videos or something down here, and certainly you can find a link to his channel on my channel page. If you had a choice between watching his videos and watching mine, frankly, you ought to just watch his, so far as real hardcore, serious preparations for hard times are concerned. I'll be that blunt about it. But the point that he brought up in a video response to that video that I want to discuss a little bit is the following. Don't get the idea that there is no value to opportunism. Opportunism, by definition, means that you're taking advantage of whatever opportunities present themselves to you. This can certainly be a part of a good plan. It's just not a plan in and of itself. For instance, he's done some tremendous videos. You really ought to watch his stuff having to do with how you can make use of abandoned resources. Taking apart unused houses for use in construction material, things like that. Those are all, great things to do. Obviously, if you find abandoned resources or resources that are not being used, there is nothing immoral, improper, illegal, going against the law of God to say, wow, I found myself, in the middle of nowhere, a bunch of buckets of rice or something, a bunch of buckets of water. Go for it. That is, by definition, opportunism. It's just not the kind of opportunism that I'm talking about that would inspire somebody to have their plan be basically doing nothing now and then later on counting on getting a gun, going out and looting. Opportunism certainly can be a part of a plan. It's simply not a plan in and of itself. Nothing that I've said should be construed as saying that you shouldn't take advantage of any opportunities that come your way to act responsibly and morally and to better yourself as a result of it. That's pretty much it. That's Zombie Tactics for today. With more light this time, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.